Hi guys, welcome to Love and Lust audiobooks channel, updated daily with great audiobooks. So please subscribe to me if you don't want to miss it. Well, let's go to read this book, Alpha's Forced Mate, Part 2, Chapter 11 to 20. Chapter 11, He's Getting a Luna. As I walked away from Marcus's office, painfully reminded that I was just something he was delaying with, Lyanna came and caught up with me. She came right up against me, sniffing near my shoulder, and I flinched away instinctively. Hey, I objected. What was that? Oh, sorry. She apologized, a little sheepishly. I know you just came from my brother. I wanted to know who was with him. I stared at her like she was insane. So you sniffed me. I asked her, I said, putting my hands on my hips, just because I am all right with finding a way to make this whole mate bond thing work out for everyone. Doesn't mean I'm suddenly okay with all your little wolfy habits and heart eating and all of that. Heart eating, she asked, frowning. Did Marcus already tell you about the heart eating? A look of horror must have come over my face because Lyanna burst out laughing. Sorry, I just had to, she said, her laughter calming down. It didn't last very long in any case. Why did you need to know who was with Marcus? I asked her, and who was it? In any case, it was Bernard Ben, Lyanna said, clarifying his beta. Ben is the wolf second in charge. Well, third now, since you're technically second in charge. I blinked. I hadn't thought of that part, actually. I was a wolf in charge now, but it didn't really matter. If Marcus was just going to dismiss me in any case. And I needed to know. Lyanna continued, dropping her voice a little because a few things have been happening recently. And I want to know what's going on. I frowned at her. Where is going on? I asked. I honestly thought that my presence was the one thing causing the most chaos right now. Food is missing, Lyanna murmured, glancing around. A lot of it winter stores, and some animals around the borders are missing. Poached probably, but it will affect whether the pack eats well in winter or is rationed. And that always affects morale. It's been happening for a few weeks now, a little at a time, but there is a trend. Someone is definitely stealing. I stared at her. A few weeks already. Then that meant that the trouble in the pack started before I even got here. A jolt of guilt went through me at that. I probably hadn't made matters any easier with my presence then. And I had probably only added to all the difficulties that Marcus and the pack had already been going through. Is there anything else? I asked her. I wanted to get a proper picture of what was going on. Lyanna looked around again. Weapons, she murmured, even softer this time, as she came close to me. Enough to cause a problem. It doesn't really matter where it's going. It's more the fact of the matter that it's being taken away from us. Weapons and food, I murmured. It sounds like someone is trying to weaken the pack. Lyanna nodded. It could be any of the other 4 of the big 5 packs, but really we can't rule out any of the smaller ones either. I thought back to the large territory that Marcus hadn't explained yet. I had no idea why, but I felt like there was something there that might be influencing this too. Lyanna opened her mouth to say something more, but before she got a chance to get anything else out, Ben came up to us. Marcus is asking for you, he said, with a slight bow, and then a glance at Lyanna. You should go to him immediately, Lyanna said with a nod. I trusted her word, and I was going to make sure that this new arrangement. I swallowed the hurt I had felt when he just dismissed me the way that he had, and I went straight back the way that I had come. I found the door already open and I went right in without knocking or waiting for him to call me in. "You will join the war council," Marcus said, barely glancing at me. His words made no sense, and his look over at me was so brief that I was sure he couldn't be speaking to me. Reconvene immediately. He continued speaking, and I looked behind me to see if anyone else had come in that he could possibly be speaking to. There was no one, but still, his sentences made no sense, not if they were directed at me. It actually made more sense if he was talking to some specter only he could see, or if there was some other wolf outside that he was talking to. My cheeks immediately flushed red as I realized that probably was the case. They had an incredible hearing ability. If one spoke from across the field, the other could hear, even if they spoke in a normal voice. It was more than possible that he was talking to someone outside. "Did you not hear me?" Marcus demanded, and this time he was staring right at me. There was no mistaking that he was talking to me that time. What I asked, the confusion coming through my voice clearly. "Are you talking to me?" Marcus looked at me like I had just lost a few brain cells. And he was confused as to why. "There is no one else in the room," Marcus said calmly, but I could hear that he was biting down on his back teeth. "What do you mean you want me to join the war council?" I asked him. My confusion had turned to incredulity. "I won't have it seem like I'm just taking in strays in this pack," Marcus said flatly. "You might be my mate, but you must still have use. If I could have it my way, I would have hoped to have a mate from a strong pack and ally our two tribes together as it stands. I don't have that. I have you, and you must prove your worth." I huffed, folding my arms across my chest. It wasn't that I didn't understand marrying for political gain, and if that was what he had wanted for himself, then I well and truly would have wanted that for him. But as he had said earlier, we all must make sacrifices once the moon goddess decides, and I honestly thought that I had made more than enough sacrifices. "You know, Tinas," I told him. No other Luna would have been asked to prove her worth. He would not be treating anyone else like that. And maybe I was not like anyone else, but that didn't make any difference to me. I was here, I was what he got, and I was a person, and he was going to respect that, and he was going to respect me. I was not here to prove myself and perform like some circus animal. "I am he," answered, "and you cannot attend a war council meeting dressed like that," he said again, giving me a quick once-over. "Go back to the room. I'll have Lyanna meet you there, and she'll make sure that you're appropriately dressed." Being appropriately dressed for a war meeting was the last thing on my mind. I pushed down the emotions that were threatening to spill over me. I had finally started to feel like we had reached some point of understanding. I had finally begun to feel less like a prisoner and more like a part of everything here. And now his words just undid all of that. Could I really be a part of the pack if my presence wasn't enough? Could I really be a part of the family if I needed to prove who I was and what worth I had? But more than that, was that really what Marcus thought of me, that I was a liability to the extent that I had to perform in front of his pack, in front of his war council? Marcus, I told him, stopping whatever machinations he had going on right in their tracks. I wasn't going to argue with him, but I wasn't also just going to swallow everything just for the sake of keeping the peace. I wanted him to know what he had done was wrong, but that I was willing to work through it to find a solution with him. I was willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I was willing to accept that there may be a few more things that I still did not fully understand about pack life. "Ariella," Marcus said again, cutting me off, "I don't have time to argue with you. Some of the food stores from the pack have gone missing. Not a lot, but an amount worth noticing. I'm sure you can understand the implications of that, and some of our weapons too. And I'm sure that anyone can understand the meaning of that. Please, he said again, though there was the barest hint of a snarl coming through his voice. Then go to the room, and Lyanna will be with you soon. I didn't want to argue. I wanted to keep the conversation going at least. But his words stopped me in my tracks and made everything a little clearer. It was things that Lyanna had just told me, but hearing him say it made it a little more serious. Maybe it was because it meant that he was trusting me with this information. I had no idea, but I swallowed my words. I had made an intention to be a help here and not a hindrance. I would stick to my promise to myself. This was not the time for me to be arguing with him. Food was missing. Weapons were missing. Those were things a lot more important than the tone that he spoke to me in. I didn't think that it wasn't important. It was just that it was going to be something that we would have to discuss another time. All right, I told him, simply nodding. I didn't add anything further to that. I was pretty sure that he knew me well enough by now that he knew that I was never going to just drop something entirely. Marcus looked a little taken aback, but he nodded after a moment, and I turned and left the room, just as another wolf came in. I will meet you in the council room, I told him, calling over my shoulder as I went. I didn't look back and walked away with my head held high. If you wanted to Luna, Chapter 12. She should be outlawed. Errol. I went to the room and asked for someone to have Lyanna meet me at the door. She was there before I even arrived. I need a dress for a council war meeting, I told her firmly as I approached. Try less, she told me. Lyanna opened the door for me and we walked through together. She immediately took me to one of the wardrobes on the other side of the room, and she went in without pausing. She came out holding a dress. Perfect, I told her, smiling, looking at the garment in her hand. She helped me dress, and within the hour I was ready to leave. Lyanna took me to the council room, and once I was sure that everyone was already gathered, I indicated to the guards to let me through. They had obviously been well informed that I was indeed coming and that I was to be let through, because they responded to my request immediately. Everyone's jaw dropped as I walked into the room. I remembered Lyanna's words and made sure to keep my head high, my jaw extended. I was a human, but I was a Luna, and that was who they were dealing with. But even though my actions mollified some, I saw anger flare up in others. What is she doing here? Someone demanded. Radio snarled an answer immediately. She is Luna. He turned to the wolf, snarling. She belongs here. I didn't let his words affect me emotionally in any way. I knew that Marcus was only speaking because I was his mate, and so an extension of him. It didn't really have anything to do with me. He wasn't defending or protecting me for any other reason other than he refused to look weak in any aspect of himself. But even I could see that his power had weakened in the pack. Everything that had been happening, all the terrible things that they had to endure, made everything more difficult for them right now. And it was hard for them to just accept the words of their alpha. I swallowed hard, but refused to be bowed. We would fix this. I think she is the spy one of the wolves called out. She is the reason every misfortune has befallen on us so far. She is the cause itself. And I was frozen to my feet. There was almost no way for me to refute what he was saying. And I couldn't be sure whether it was something that I should even stoop to answering. It would be enough of an insult that I would have to prove my innocence. I was the Luna of the pack. I leveled the wolf with a stare. I might not have wanted to be here from the very beginning, but that had been my right to choose for my own life. The moon goddess had decided that I had a place here. Marcus, the alpha of the pack, had decided that I had a place here. I was part of this pack. And given that it was physically impossible for me to leave, I was not going to stand being treated like this. They wanted me here because they believed I was their Luna, chosen by the moon goddess. Fine. Then they were going to have to treat me like that. I thank you for speaking up, I told the wolf, deepening my voice just a little. But perhaps a little more thought is required before you speak next time. These misfortunes have been going on since before I arrived, haven't they? Does it then follow on with reason to accuse me of something happening only because it coincided with my arrival? I kept quiet and didn't say anything further. Immediately, I wanted them all to understand how stupid of a leap it was that he had made. But I wasn't done just yet. I would also have you consider, I continued, that it would actually be very convenient timing for an attack to happen just as a new Luna comes to the pack. Surely that tactic is not unfamiliar in your world. The wolf that had spoken looked to the ground as he shuffled from one foot to the other. He muttered something under his breath, but didn't speak aloud. I would not entertain his behavior a moment longer. I turned away from him to Marcus. And I found Marcus looking at me strangely. Then he seemed to be staring almost through me. There was a different look on his face and a different gleam in his eye. I couldn't tell what it was just yet, though. I didn't know him well enough to decipher his meanings just yet. And this was definitely not the place to ask. I think it would be wise to remember Marcus spoke, looking at the pack. That Ariella is also Luna to our pack. If she ever had any affiliation to anyone else before coming here, it would have disintegrated as soon as I claimed her. Anyone that has found their true mate will understand. I didn't, but then again, I was human. I wasn't meant to understand how everything in their world worked. But I glanced around and saw that enough of the wolves had understood what Marcus had meant. Some of them I knew weren't even mated yet, but the legends and stories of the mate bond were so incredible that they were all ready to accept Marcus's words on face value. But she is a human. Another voice called out, and I turned to see who had spoken. And this time, I felt my mask slip for just a moment. It was Jason. I think she is the spy, Jason said again once he had the attention of everyone on him. And I know that I am the reason she is here, so I will take full responsibility for what that entails. I know the consequences that will befall me if she is the spy, and I am still stating it. Explain yourself. Another wolf called, speaking to Jason. I believe that she tricked me into bringing her into this pack, Jason said again. I almost laughed out loud, but that really wouldn't have been proper decorum. I think proper protocol should be adhered to, Jason spoke. And I briefly wondered why he was here. I didn't think that he had the complete right to be in the war meeting right now. He wasn't as high-ranking as any of the others here. And what do you mean by that? Lyanna challenged him, which pack traditions are not being adhered to at this moment. She isn't a wolf, Jason yelled, pointing an accusatory finger in my direction. I tried not to let his words affect me. And the truth of the matter was that they stung anyway. Had this been his thoughts all along? He had told me that it hadn't mattered to him, that I was a human, that I was his fated mate, and that was all that had mattered. Things were entirely different now. I wasn't his fated mate. But just like things were different, they were also very much still the same. I may not be his fated mate, but I was Marcus's. And if he could think that they should have made an exception for him, then he should have the same perception when it comes to Marcus. But there was a tone in his voice that I couldn't quite place. There was just something there that was still bothering me. It was more than just my status as a human, because there was an almost disgust to his tone that couldn't be because of me, and definitely one that couldn't be new. "She is our Luna," Marcus snarled at him. And for a moment, I felt butterflies in my stomach. For a moment, it was hard to believe that he wasn't defending me from me. At that moment, I felt like he was defending me because I was his mate. Well and true. I tried not to let it get the better of me. I knew that if I did not crush these butterflies now while I had the chance, then it would only lead to trouble later on. "And if you want to challenge me on that," Marcus added, "then you are welcome to challenge me now." There was a threat in his voice that I had never heard before, a timbre that I couldn't place, but I didn't let myself dwell on it. I turned to Jason and I saw that he had taken a step back. He didn't want to be fighting Marcus. And this time I could see that it wasn't because he was his alpha that he was respecting. It was because he was scared. And maybe that had been what it was the last time too. Maybe it hadn't ever been respect that made him obedient to Marcus's laws. He had just been too afraid to stand up to him. "I don't want to challenge you," Jason said, a slight quiver in his voice. "Then hold your tongue," Lyanna said to him. But being addressed by Lyanna seemed to have brought him back to the situation. And I suppose that he realized that it wasn't all or nothing. He didn't have to challenge Marcus just to make me suffer. I saw a little bit of bravado return, and he stood just a little taller again. I called it, "She has to be outlawed." Jason screamed through the pack, and I had never once seen him look so weak and pitiful. I was stronger than he was now. Not physically, but my status was so far above his that after Marcus had taken me away, I hadn't even run into him again. And for some reason, now that I was so much above him, I could see him so much clearer than before. He was nothing compared to Marcus, and a part of me wondered how I had ever seen any kind of strength in him. But the truth was that I had very little to compare it to. My birth father had never been around, and then my stepfather was dismissive when he wasn't cruel. There hadn't really been any expectations for how I was supposed to be treated. Jason had come and swooped in and taken advantage of that entirely. But all of these realizations had little benefit to me. Now I had already fallen into his lies, and now here he was trying to destroy me. And I could see that everyone around us was listening. How could they not be? Jason was the one that had brought me into the pack. It would only make sense that he had more authority than me. Chapter 13, Do You Want Him? Area. The meeting ended very abruptly. Marcus didn't let anyone else speak after that, and we were all dismissed, the meeting to be reconvened at another time. Before I turned and walked out, Lyanna appeared at my side and she walked me out of the room. "What just happened?" I asked her, very confused. "Not here," she told me, shaking her head. "The walls have ears, especially when a Luna speaks. I'll explain in your room." We walked there quickly, with Lyanna staying by my side the entire time. I opened the door and let her through, shutting it behind her quickly. It really was starting to feel like my room now. Marcus slept there too, but he came in very rarely other than to sleep. I suppose he had his office that he could go to. Marcus has the right to pause the council. Now, Lyanna explained, Jason has called for exilement. Under our pack law, Marcus has to consider his request and then give a decision about it. There were so many questions that burned through my mind on this, but none of them seemed to have that much importance right now. I just can't believe that this is Jason. I told her, though, even as I spoke, I knew the hollowness of my word. I hadn't really known him well enough to say that this was entirely out of character. And if it hadn't been that I was in a terrible situation and that I had been desperate for a way out, I probably wouldn't have gone with him. That hadn't been the first time he'd asked after all. But there was still a sting of rejection in his words. He is still reeling from his loss. Liana told me, though, her words were a little more clouded. I could tell that even she didn't entirely believe in what she was saying. But then again, that entire meeting had been one big mess. Marcus had made no progress in trying to find who had damaged the food stores or who had taken the weapon. Though I had to admit, it had been clear that though the wolves might have known something, they had something else that they wanted to discuss. They wanted to know why a human suddenly had such authority in their pack. And in any other circumstances, I would have understood that. But I hadn't just walked in and started ordering everyone around. I hadn't just walked into the pack lands and straight to the throne. I had been brought in here by another one of their pack members and then forced to stay by their alpha. And Jason wasn't exactly helping anything. And he seemed to have a little more standing with the pack when it came to me, because he had brought me into the pack, which meant that he had authority over me, for some insane reason. It was so crazy that I wanted to scream. I had only known him for 4 months. What loss, I huffed, folding my arms across my chest. He was lying. I wasn't his fated mate. And in the 4 months that I had known him, he had been deceiving me the entire time. Honestly, it made no sense for them to trust his word as much as they did. It would have been easier for them to have accepted that I knew what I was talking about when it came to him. Given that he had been the one lying to me all this time, it was just as possible for him to be lying to them again. It was just as possible for him to be the spy. But Liana took a few steps away from me and then turned back around to face me. We don't all get fated mates, she explained gently. An alpha and Luna pairing is rare because it requires so many things to have fallen into place. Just so many our wolves choose their mate. I swallowed. So there had been another side to the story. Another part that Jason could ease into to tell me. Another part that he didn't. We weren't fated mates, fine, but was I even his proper choice? He had given me up so quickly to Marcus. And alright, maybe I understood that a bit better, now given Marcus' strength and reputation. And still, he hadn't fought at all. And some small part of me was sure that if the roles had been reversed, Marcus would have fought to the death. Though I couldn't say if it would be for me or if it would be because he would want to defend his property. Still, that he would be willing to fight already meant that he was stronger than Jason, in body and mind. So why didn't he just say that then? I asked him, why did he have to lie? Though even I was a little skeptical that I would have come with him if he had told me that I was just his choice. I had been hesitant to go with him at all, and that was even after he had told me that we were fated mates, and after I had nowhere else to go. I can only imagine how hesitant I would have been if he had told me I was just his choice. To get you into the pack, Liana answered, the pack laws don't allow us to choose a mate from the human. We can only bring a human mate in if they are fated to us. And even then, it's up to the alpha to decide first. And realized then that she misunderstood me. No, I said, shaking my head. Why did he lie to me? Liana said, understanding dawning over her. I don't know, maybe he thought you wouldn't be able to lie convincingly enough. You definitely wouldn't have been able to lie like a wolf. I remembered Marcus telling me a few things about that. Wolves had a different ability to tell if someone was lying. It was part facial expressions, part the change in pheromones that happened when someone was lying. I guess that answer made sense. It didn't help lessen the feeling of betrayal, though. But then he had no right to say the things he said earlier. I told her fiercely. No, Lyanna agreed with me. He definitely did not. And actually, he should have had no authority to speak when he did, and to say what he had. I'm not even entirely sure why he was at the meeting. His rank is way below what was needed for the war council. I should speak to my brother and see if he knows anything about that. Her words were of little comfort. It wasn't Jason's presence or his words at the meeting that bothered me. It was his words at all. But just as Lyanna finished speaking, it was like she had summoned her brother himself. Because at that moment, the door opened and Marcus walked through. He nodded to his sister and then walked over to me. You will not be exiled. Marcus told me if Jason thinks that I'm just going to escort you out of the pack lands after I fought so hard to keep you from running away, then he has another thing coming. I wished that I could find comfort in either of their words, but the truth was that I just couldn't. And Lyanna is right. Marcus continued speaking, walking away from me as he took off the outer armor that he had worn to the meeting. Jason is stinging from rejection. We just need to give him some cooling off time and his intensity will pass. And then the entire thing will fade away. Everyone that supports him is doing so because he would have the strongest claim. No one else could make these accusations against you and have their words heard. Those words gave me comfort. So it really was just Jason. That was the problem here. If anyone else brought these same words of accusation against me, they would be crushed immediately. That still left us to deal with Jason. But then I registered Marcus's word. I didn't reject him, though. I told the two wolves in the room with me. He discarded me. He was the one that didn't want to fight for me. He brought me all the way here. And then, when you stepped in, he didn't even try to explain. He didn't even offer that he would take me away, that we could be together away from the pack. He just rolled over and handed me over to you like I was some doll. And I finished speaking. I turned to Marcus, and I was sure that I'd never seen such fury on him before. Is that what you would have wanted? Marcus demanded, is that what you want? Still, you want him to fight for you, to want you. You wish you to be his mate. You would stay here, in this pack willingly for him. Immediately, I realized my mistake and how my words would have sounded, but it just wasn't the truth. That wasn't what I said. I told him, standing my ground. He was taking my words and spinning them around, giving them a meaning that I hadn't intended. He knew that I was only talking in the context of Jason's feelings and actions, and how nothing made sense or matched up in any way. He had no right to hold this over me like this. That's what it sounded like, you meant, Marcus yelled, throwing his armor across the room. It crashed into a vase and shattered it to the floor. Don't try to tell me that wasn't what you wanted in the beginning. I bit my tongue. It was what I had wanted in the beginning. I had wanted him to fight for me. But that had been a long time ago, and it had been before I knew Jason properly, and before I knew Marcus. But now I knew them both so much better. And I was glad that things had fallen the way they had. I still wished to just leave, but I never wished to stay with Jason. Not here, and not even outside in the human world. And I could tell all of this to Marcus, but that wasn't the question he asked, and it wasn't the answer he wanted. And the answer to the question he asked would not make him happy. So I had no choice but to not answer at all. That's what I thought. Marcus snarled through gritted teeth, and then he turned and stalked out of the room. The door slammed on his way out. Chapter 14, Together in the Moonlight. Area. He's just stressed right now. I'm sure he knows what you meant. I'm going to go speak to him, Lyanna told me as she followed her brother out the door. She pulled the door closed behind her, and I heard her call her brother's name. And then just like that, I was alone in this entire mess. I wasn't as sure about Marcus understanding my words as Lyanna was, and I knew that there was a big problem here that needed to be fixed. And there was only one way to solve this entire situation. I had to speak to Jason. He was the one leading the insurgency. The wolves gathered around him and relied on his knowledge of me, and the fact that he had brought me into the pack to base their claim that I should not be trusted. If they could convince the rest of the pack of what they thought, that I was the culprit or the one causing all the mayhem and chaos in the pack, then it put Marcus in a very difficult situation. And I couldn't really imagine the true depth of that. But Lyanna had made it very clear to me that it would not be a good thing in any way. The pack rallying against an alpha and Luna was never good. Even in the wild, when true wolves did it, it always led to disaster for the pack. It was what Marcus was trying to prevent and what he had been trying to prevent these past few days. But Jason could stop all of that. In fact, he could undo everything that had been done before. If I could just speak to him and clear the air between us, then maybe I could undo all the damage that had been done so far. A part of me blamed myself for this. If I had just not been so self-absorbed the past few days, then I would have been able to see what was happening and I would have been able to stop it in its tracks. But now Jason already had such a big number of wolves on his side. It wasn't impossible to do. I reminded myself all I had to do was talk to him. In all honesty, it was something that I should have done a while ago. I should have spoken to him long before the situation became this dire. But I had been hurt and a little humiliated, actually. I had believed him. I had turned and left my entire family, my home, everything for him. And he had just up and left me high and dry when it suited him, when it was too much for him to go against his alpha. Stop it, because I told myself, now is not the time for me to get this angry. If I let my anger get away from me again, then there was a very good chance that I was not going to get around to talking to him. Or I would forget myself in the conversation, and we might just be in a worse position than when we started. No, I needed to speak to him. There was no doubt about that, but I needed to be calm first. So I took the rest of the afternoon to calm myself down. I had wanted to go speak to him that day still, and as soon as possible, but I needed the time to make sure that I wouldn't just scream at him. And only by the time the sun set did I feel that I was calm enough to send him a message, requesting him to meet me. I didn't want Marcus involved in this in any way. If he was, then it would lose all credibility. Everyone would just say that it was Marcus trying to secure his place and make sure that his Luna was protected. Besides, I was pretty sure that Jason wasn't going to listen to Marcus anyway. I didn't get an answer from Jason, so I had to just trust that he was going to show up there. I needed to clear the air with him. Maybe once everything is straightened out with Jason, we can all focus on finding the true culprit together. Maybe there was still a chance to restore peace. I quickly got dressed, wearing everything black so that I wouldn't be noticed under the cover of darkness. Then I left the room and quickly made my way to the place I had asked him to meet. He wasn't there, and for a while he didn't come. Then, almost just as I had given up hope of him showing up, there he was, standing in front of me. And for a moment I forgot what I had wanted to say. "Why did you ask to meet me?" Jason said, when the silence between us stretched for far too long. "I have nothing to say to you." I frowned at him. There was no way that could be the truth. Surely He had at least a few things that he wanted to say to me. There had to be something that he wanted to know. But I couldn't focus on that right now. I only focused on what was important to the pack. Why are you doing this? I asked him. I allowed a small amount of pleading to seep into my voice. There was no way that I was going to get through to him if I was busy being proud. I have no idea what you're talking about, Jason answered flatly. A small niggling of doubt crept into me. Maybe this wasn't the best thing to be doing. Something seemed wrong about Jason, but I pushed the thought away and made myself focus on what was happening in front of me. I don't know why you won't even speak to me about this. I tried reasoning with Jason. You are the one that brought me here. I'm only a part of this pack because of you. The least you can do is tell me now why you think I'm a spy. Did you think that at the time you brought me in? It was a mistake to bring you in, Jason said flatly. I see that now. And if I had just waited a little longer, I would have known not to bring you in at all. I would have seen you for who and what you really were. Those words stung. I was the same person that he had met. In fact, maybe just a little less selfish and self-centered. I had learned to put the pack first, or at least not put myself first on every single thing. I felt anger rising up in me. His plans hadn't worked out the way that he had wanted. But neither had anyone else's. That was no reason for him to take it out on me. He was being cruel. And quite frankly, I didn't want to have to deal with it. Everyone else had been at this point, but we had all worked through our issues a while ago already. He was the only one that was still stuck on victim mode, and I was done with it. But before I could unleash a torrent of anger directed solely at him, I forced myself to calm down. We would get absolutely nowhere if I just started screaming at him out of the blue. I needed to be calm and I needed to think this through. We would get through this. I just needed to figure out what I was going to say. Listen, I tried again and then immediately checked myself. My tone was still far too harsh. Please understand. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I don't even know what happened entirely. Marcus is saying there is something strange about the bond. He didn't feel the initial jolt. He only felt that I was his mate. Jason looked at me strangely. Then, and the beginning of a smile was on his face. But before it could form properly, he quickly suppressed it. You know what? Jason said again, coming close to me. I let him against my instincts, screaming at me to run. I let him come closer to me. He lingered there in the space between us for a moment. He leaned in closer to me, and still going against my better judgment, I let him. I hope you both suffer, Jason murmured, and then he turned and walked away, and I was left behind, staring at his retreating form. I tried to breathe deeply, but even breathing was something that was becoming more difficult for me. There is no way that this was real. It just wasn't possible. But there was also no way to deny what I was seeing. I had left the room after our little argument, and Leanna had come looking for me not long after that. She tried to explain the meaning of Ariella's words, but the truth was that it didn't matter. I had already realized that I was at fault there. But I couldn't just go back to her and apologize immediately. It was what I should have done. There was no doubt in my mind. But I couldn't. I just couldn't apologize to a human. I knew that Ariella was my mate. I knew it, like I knew that I was a wolf and I would die without her. But she was also human, and I still couldn't understand that part. Yet I wasn't going to stand in my mistake forever, so I had gone back to the room after the sunset. Why? Where I had been about to, just as I reached it, I found Ariella leaving the room, and I had to follow her. And now I stood watching her and Jason speaking and standing together under the full moon. I couldn't hear what they were saying. The winds were blowing too high tonight, and it was carrying their words away from me. But I could see them clearly, and there was no mistaking what was happening. No one else would have the right to be standing so close to her. No one but me. And there he was, so close that he could practically touch her. I wanted to snarl. I wanted to transform and rip his throat out, but I knew what that would mean if I did. And I couldn't allow that to happen to the pack. If Aria wanted Jason so badly she could have him, I wasn't going to stand in their way. I wouldn't let her leave the pack, but there was nothing more that I could enforce on her. I was the alpha of the pack, but over her, it seemed, I had no power. Chapter 15. A lunar area. I watched as Jason left with more than just a little dejection inside of me. I had really wanted this to work. I had hoped that it would work. And more than that, I now knew that there were not many other options that I had. I took a deep breath. I wouldn't let this get me down. I needed to focus and rethink in order to get to a solution. So with that resolve in mind, I turned and headed back to the room. For the first time, I took a look around me and I really began to see the place that I had been brought to. I stopped thinking of me being here as me coming here. I began to think of it as if I had been brought, by fate, the universe, maybe even by the moon goddess. I had no idea any longer. But just by thinking about it that way, it made all the difference to me. I didn't feel like I had made some monumental mistake. Not any longer. I well and truly felt like I was where I was supposed to be. I had no idea why, but I was here and I needed to accept it anyway. I looked around the place as I walked. It was strange, actually. It was like a mix of everything. There were some parts that looked almost like it was a city, and there were some parts that looked almost like it was a town, and some even looked like they were nothing more than a village. I knew that the wolves lived here almost entirely independent of everything and everyone. Whatever they needed, they could find here. It was a strange way to imagine everything living, but it worked. The buildings I walked past were more built up. The closer I went into the center, the more the place resembled a city. I wonder what they were planning for it to end up like. Either way, it wasn't what I had been expecting when I had first heard of the place. Jason had told me about it, but he hadn't been able to do it justice for that part, though. I couldn't blame him. I didn't think that there was anyone that would be able to do this place justice. I sighed. I was almost home, and I hadn't yet thought of another plan. I was going to have to talk to Marcus, and I hated the idea of not having anything to present to him. This was my fault. After all, I would have liked to at least give him an option for a solution. I reached the door to our house. It was small, and to be honest, I hadn't really gone through anything other parts of the house, but I was starting to feel more comfortable here. The changes had come suddenly, but I knew that things just worked like that sometimes. I touched the door frame. There was so much that I could feel through the thick wood. So much life, so much history. I wondered how long the pack had been living here and how long this place had stood. I would ask the next time I saw Lyanna. Maybe I would even ask Marcus. I couldn't be sure about that, though. He was something a little more difficult for me to figure out. Sometimes I could feel him becoming kinder and warmer to me, and then it was like a switch, and he was an entirely different person. I sighed, my hand still on the door to the house, and took a deep breath. He was an enigma, and I didn't have the time right now to try and figure him out. There were just so many things that I had to do still. And though Marcus was a big part of everything, he couldn't be the only focus. Not now, not when people were trying to kill me. I pushed on the door to the house and went inside. "Where were you?" a voice came from the darkness, making me jump. "Oh my God," I exclaimed. "Marcus, what are you doing?" "You nearly gave me a heart attack there." Once my eyes adjusted to the light, I realized that it wasn't really as dark as I had imagined. I had just come in from outside, where the full moon still shone brightly on everything. "Answer my question first," Marcus demanded. I stared at him. If he thought that he was going to speak to me like this, then he really had another thing coming. I opened my mouth to yell at him, but I quickly closed it. I had already gone through the mill with Jason tonight. I didn't need to be fighting Marcus too, especially not since we were both on the same side or trying to be, at least. I was trying to make a plan to work something out. I told him, honestly, I didn't want to say Jason's name, not unless I absolutely had to. I wanted to see if there was a way for us to move past this entire thing with everyone thinking I was a spy. But my words, as calm and collected as they were, seemed to only enrage him. I watched as a change came over his face dipping into a snarl I had never really seen before. "Enter, lie to me," he snarled. I stared at him in confusion. I wasn't lying. Surely he could sense that. "I don't know what you're talking about," I told him just a little more firmly. Marcus got out of his seat and rushed toward me. It was so quick I almost couldn't follow him. But then he was right in front of me, pushing me up against the door. The heat radiating from him overpowered my senses. "Don't you dare lie to me," he snarled again, close to my face. "You've gotten better at it. I can't even tell that you're lying, but I know you are." "Did Jason teach you to lie to wolves now?" I felt my heart hammering in my chest, but I forced myself to be calm. I wouldn't give in to him. But even as I tried to rationalize it in my mind, there was another part of me that didn't want to be calm. There was a part of me that wanted to rage at him. A part of me that wanted to snarl, just as he was. But I couldn't. I wasn't a wolf, and I knew that giving in to that part of me right now would only lead to disaster. I couldn't fight the way that he could. I couldn't grow claws. "Marcus," I tried to reason with him again. "I have no idea why you're behaving like this. But I need you to calm down. There is no reason for you to be attacking me like this. I thought we were finally getting to a place of better understanding." "I thought so too," he growled, but he still didn't back off. He still didn't calm himself in any way. But I guess that we were both mistaken, though. "I can't see the reason that you're so confused." I took a deep breath. His words weren't making any sense, but he was in a state of anger. I wouldn't expect him to be making any sense. Marcus grasped the wood behind me, his claws digging into the door. It was a shame. The wood felt so old. It had probably endured so much, only to be destroyed now by the alpha who was lost to the throes of what looked to be madness. I had no explanation for the way Marcus was behaving, but I honestly didn't want to explain it either. He needed to calm down, and that was all I was done, trying to rationalize everything for him and about him. He just needed to stop. "Marcus," I told him, my voice firmer and harder. "Get off me now. You're going to hurt me. You're going to break the door, and you're losing your mind." Marcus snarled, pulled his arm back, and punched the door again. There was no doubt in my mind that he was trying to scare me, and I refused to be frightened. "You were with Jason today," he screamed at me. "You betrayed me." How could he know that? Did he smell Jason on me? But no, that was impossible. Jason hadn't touched me, and we'd barely been talking for 5 minutes. The only possible reason could be that he had seen me, which meant that he had followed me. And I felt anger flare up in me. Then it was one thing to have his guards watch me in the beginning. But once we had come to our agreements and he had pulled his guards off me, I thought that we were making progress. I hadn't realized that he had just started following me himself. You were following me, I said, low and hard, a slight timbre creeping into my voice. How dare you? How dare I? Marcus challenged. You were with Jason. I was trying to fix this. I screamed, though I knew that he was blinded by jealousy now. I knew that there was nothing I could say to get through to him. I want nothing to do with Jason. I wanted him to call this entire thing off. But still, Marcus didn't relent. He thought I was betraying him. He thought he was losing his mate. He had told me the lengths this would drive him to, and I forced myself to be calmer. I needed to stop this before it became impossible to reverse. And while there was nothing I could say to undo it, there was something I could do before I could even fully comprehend what I was doing, before I could use reason to stop myself. I closed the last space separating us, pressing myself to him, pressing my lips against his harshly. And it wasn't that I was able to calm him. Tapped in me. And I pulled my lips off his and snarled at him. I pushed him roughly away from me, and I noticed my fingernails, for the first time, lengthened into claws. Marcus staggered back from me, and I realized the strength I must have pushed with, enough to make the alpha wolf retreat. I glanced at myself in the mirror on the wall facing me, and I saw my eyes glowing gold, and my teeth, my canines lengthened into fangs. I turned to Marcus and snarled down at him, and I saw his anger gone entirely. You're a wolf, Marcus murmured. More than just a wolf, a Luna. Chapter 16, More Than a Kid. A very powerful Luna, 'cause the wolf inside of me spoke. And her voice sounded so familiar. It was the same voice that came to me in thought. Sometimes, though, I had always just assumed that it was my own thoughts. I stared down at Marcus, wanting to focus on anything other than what was happening in my own mind. Without any kind of warning, Marcus rushed at me, cupping his hands on either side of my face, and then I felt his lips press against mine. And then I punched him square across the jaw. He staggered back, and for a moment, I almost didn't register what that meant. I had punched him, and instead of my hand being broken, he had gone reeling. I flexed my fingers. There was a bit of a sting, but nothing was broken, and I had punched him hard enough that there should be some kind of damage. No, 'cause my thoughts answered me. We're as strong as he is now. He is our mate. The thoughts in my head stopped me dead in my tracks. That voice was inside my head, but it definitely was not mine. It is yours, 'cause the voice came again. I'm a part of you. I've always been here, sleeping. I blinked. There was no way that I was imagining this. I stared at Marcus, standing just in front of me. Fair. I struggled to explain what was happening. There's a voice. Even though my mind was telling me that it was a wolf, I couldn't fully understand it. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to, or if it was just one more thing in this world that I couldn't fathom. It's all right, Marcus murmured. Just talk to her. She's your wolf. He gave a step closer to me and had his arms spread wide, hands up as if in a sign of peace. But at this point, I was only shocked that there were still things that I could be surprised by. But it wore off pretty quickly, and I decided to give her a chance. "Where were you this whole time?" 'cause I asked. "I was here," 'cause she answered. "You just didn't want to take note of me. I'm not sure why, though. It seemed like you almost couldn't, for some reason." 'Cause I closed my eyes, and immediately I could see her in my mind. She was the wolf that I had seen in my dream. I had thought that it was Marcus, but that had obviously been very wrong, and I hadn't thought to consider that I could be another wolf. But why not? 'Cause she asked me, "Why wouldn't you think that you're a wolf?" I shook my head. Why would I? 'Cause I asked, what reason could I have for thinking that? It's insane for anyone to imagine that they're a magical creature. And what if just that was the exact requirement? 'Cause she probed again. It was strange. It was like I could see two parts of myself in my head. I could see the wolf and I could see the human. And the wolf part walked around, moving freely, shaking her fur, while the human remained standing still. It was more than strange, but it was also so normal, so comforting. What does she look like? Marcus's voice drew me out of my thoughts, and I opened my eyes to look at him. He was standing now and so close to me. I had missed him getting to his feet entirely. I hadn't even noticed him walking toward me, so engrossed. I had been in my own thought. He looked different now, too. He looked calmer. For one, the anger that he had moments ago was entirely gone. But more than that, he looked relieved and hopeful, and that was something I had never seen on him before. He looked like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders, and like every hope of his had been answered. "What does your wolf look like?" Marcus asked again, coming to me slowly, almost cautiously. I glanced at myself in the mirror again. He was right to be cautious. I would be terrified if I was faced with a creature like the one I could see right now. "She's white," I answered him slowly, "pure white." I didn't know what else to say. I didn't know how to describe her to me. She felt like the personification of the moon goddess inside of me. I could see why they worship the moon, then, if that was what their wolves felt like to them. I wished I could touch her. I reached out to her in my mind, and she came to my hand willingly. I felt shock go through me as she touched me, even though it was all in my mind. She felt so absolutely real. I could feel the softness of her fur, the warmth from her body. All of it felt so real. And then Marcus was there, right in front of me, pushing against me, the human me. This time it was his lips that pressed against mine, and he kissed me. I felt his whole body press against me, and I couldn't control myself. Why me? 'Cause my wolf told me gently. But even though her words were soft, there was a force behind her that I couldn't fight. And I gave over to her entirely. She wanted her mate. I wanted mine. It was strange to feel her desires so different from mine, to feel her emotions so different from mine. Quiet and so similar all at once. I felt Marcus's lips press against mine, and I responded without thinking. I let his tongue rove through my mouth. I opened for him willingly. My hands found the back of his head, and I tangled my hand through his hair, pushing his head closer against mine. There was a desperation in my actions that I didn't know about before, but for some reason didn't feel confusing anymore. This just felt right, like it was always meant to happen like this, and I was only confused how it didn't happen sooner. I felt like the wolf was in charge, but I also felt like this was me. I couldn't speak to Marcus, but his actions were as hurried as mine. His hands as desperate over my body as mine were on his. I felt his hands move along my sides, up and down, searching for a way in. His right hand cupped my breast, squeezing hard, and I moaned, unable to help myself. He swallowed every sound I made with his tongue, sweeping through my mouth, like it was mapping it out. I broke away from him for air, but he didn't let me go far. He slammed his mouth against mine again, seeking me out. I kissed back with the same strength. And then his hands found my skin, slipping through the opening of my dress. He pulled the strings holding it together loose, and I felt the fabric give under him. He ripped the dress, and I knew it was beyond saving. The sound of fabric tearing filled the air, mixing with the sound of strangled moans. He lifted me up, placing me on his waist, and I wrapped my legs around him. Marcus pulled the shreds of the dress off me, and I was wrapped around him in nothing but underwear. He cupped under my thighs and carried me further into the house. We reached the bedroom, and he lay us both down on the bed without once separating from me. Once I felt my back hit the bed, he pulled out of the kiss and immediately found the side of my neck. Baby. He kissed his way down, heading to my chest as he bit and pulled at the skin there. I was sure there would be marks in the morning. There was no mistaking it. He reached my breasts, and he just continued kissing, lingering on the swell of my chest. Then almost softly, he pulled the cup of my bra out of the way and attached his lips to a nipple, pulling it into his mouth. I moaned at the touch, and he quickly undid my bra and tossed it across the room. A free hand came up to cup my exposed breast, and he massaged me. Another hand roamed over my stomach, lower and lower down. And then I felt his hand cup my mouth. There was no doubt that I was wet. The scent of it hung thickly in the air. He pushed his hand inside my underwear, and I felt his skin against mine. My mound was wet and sensitive, and his touch felt like live electricity coursing through me. He pushed a finger inside, and I lost whatever little control of myself that I'd had. I began to rock on his fingers, and I could feel myself opening for him. His fingers inside of me felt delicious. But there was no way that it would be enough. Not to satisfy the cravings that I was feeling right now. I wanted him. I needed him now. Please, I begged, looking at him as he turned to me. I need more. I didn't know what else to say, but I didn't have to. He understood what I meant. He pulled his lips off my breast and his fingers out of me, all in one swift movement. And then he was pulling off his clothes, slowly giving me a show. He was built in places I hadn't imagined that it was possible to be built, but I didn't have long to stare at him. Soon he was undressed, and he covered my body with his again. I felt him at my opening, teasing me, and I couldn't hold out any longer. And I pushed myself onto him. I cried out at the pain and pleasure that coursed through me. He moved like an ocean, moved, powerful, and unrushed. His actions were deep and forceful, and I could only go with the motion, holding on to him like my life depended on it, as my pleasure peaked. Marcus, I screamed out as I reached my climax. Ariella, he murmured, grunting as he spilled inside of me. For a moment, we laid still, his body covering mine with my arms wrapped around him. I was tired. I had never been so bone-tired before. And I wanted nothing more than to just curl up and sleep. But almost without warning, Marcus pulled out of me and stood up in one movement. Before I could even ask anything, he turned and left the room without saying anything. A moment later, I heard the front door close, and I had never felt that empty before. Chapter 17. First transformation area. I stared at the empty space that he had left, but there really was nothing that I could do about it. He was gone. He had just upped and left, and I could probably follow him if I wanted. But did I really want that? Did I really want to face more rejection? It wasn't like I had expected him to declare undying love for me, but I'd expected a little bit more emotion than what he had just given me. I had just given him my body. For crying out loud. But I didn't have the energy to do anything. I wanted to cry. but I couldn't bring myself to do that. I couldn't even manage to sit up in bed. I brought my hand in front of my face. It was perfectly normal now. When did that happen? I tried to think of the claws, but I couldn't bring them out. I didn't try very hard. I was on the brink of sleep, and soon I couldn't even work out what I was thinking any longer. My thoughts were just a jumble of pictures and feelings, and anything coherent was beyond me. And then there was nothing after that. The next morning, I awoke alone. Marcus wasn't in bed next to me, which meant that he probably had not come back the entire night. I forced myself not to think about it. It had been a heat of the moment kind of action. And that was all it was. There was no need for me to get any kind of emotional about it. But while I tried to push him out of my mind, I couldn't not think about it for very long. And then it wasn't just in my mind any longer, because Marcus was striding through the door. But there was no chance for me to speak to him, though, since he wasn't alone. Lana and Ben came through the door with him, both of them wearing huge smiles on their faces, and I knew that Marcus had already told them. Lana made to advance toward me, but both Ben and Marcus growled at her, and she stopped dead in her track. Marcus moved a little away from them, and then, almost as one, both of them dropped their heads, bowing at me. Luna, they greeted in one voice. Instead of making me feel respected, their actions infuriated me. So this was the level of respect that I had been due. But because I had been a human, they hadn't given it to me. This is what they give a wolf, because my wolf answered me, her voice calm and gentle. It is their wolves' greeting, and they are greeting me. Her soft words and reasoning brought the cloud of anger under control, and I turned inward. What do I do? Because I asked her. But she shook her head. Nothing, because she told me. Yeah, I greet them. I was still seated on the bed, and I felt her pressing against my mind. She was trying to take over like she had last night. But this time I won't demand it, because she told me softly, I want to greet them, but only if you allow it. 'Cause there was no reason to refuse her request, and I allowed her to come to the surface. It was strange, having less control over my own body, but it wasn't altogether unpleasant. The she-wolf, once she was in control, had a different air about my body. She sat up straighter, she pushed my jaw further, and her eyes focused. I heard both Lyanna and Ben gasp and lowered their heads even further. They held it there for a moment, and then they both raised themselves up. The she-wolf stayed in control for a moment longer, and then she surrendered everything to me. And it was like I felt myself slump in almost immediately. See, Marcus told them, almost like he was proving a point. They both nodded, but I understood nothing. What I asked, looking from one party to the other in confusion. You don't have control, do you? Lyanna asked me gently. The wolf feels like an entirely different part of you, doesn't she? I wasn't sure what they meant, but then I thought of how she had taken control just now, and how different that had felt. Yeah, I answered softly. She does. Fix it, Marcus told them, not even looking at me. She was one with her wolf last night. They were one being. Something is triggering her to separate so completely. Find it and fix it. I didn't know what he was talking about or what he meant, but they apparently did. They both nodded, and then Marcus left the room. I felt the air relax a little once he was gone. I hadn't known that I had been holding myself so stiffly until he left. Maybe it was just nerves left over from everything that had happened last night. I had no idea, but I didn't really want to go into the depths of those thoughts right there. I wasn't that interested in being rejected again. What's wrong with me? I asked them. It's nothing serious, Ben told me, but it's just that you were probably so cut off from your wolf for so long that you and she are not moving in sync with each other. It's like there's a human you and a wolf you, and sometimes you act like a human and sometimes you act like a wolf, and you're supposed to be one and the same. I could understand that much. How much the same do we need to be? I asked. And in answer, both Ben and Lyanna half shifted. In a moment, their fangs lengthened, their claws came out, and even their face changed into a snarl. Can you do this? Lyanna asked. Last night I did, I answered simply, but I won't be able to do it now. I think I was very emotional last night. I wouldn't go in details with them, but I was sure that they could smell the aftermath of everything, especially since Marcus had left the house immediately after, too. Lyanna, Ben said, turning to her, "You go first. I'll go see to the other order, and then I can take the second shift and see what I can do." Then I frowned, not understanding a word that they were saying to each other. I particularly didn't like it because I was sure that they were speaking about me. Before I could ask anything, though, or demand any kind of clarity, Ben just left the room. I wasn't completely clued up on proper protocol, but there was a niggling feeling inside of me that this wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was the Luna, and after Marcus had lectured me more than enough on what I was supposed to be, I was sure that I was owed a little more respect than that. I turned to Lyanna. Even if she wouldn't exactly show me the respect of a Luna, she had been much kinder to me than anyone else since I got here. I didn't hesitate to ask her, "What's happening?" I prodded, "Where's Marcus? What was he going on about here? And what was Ben talking about?" Lyanna sighed and went to sit on one of the benches in the room. "This is very new for us," she began. "We have never had this happen in our pack before. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. There have been stories about humans that weren't human. Rather, they were wolves, hidden away in the human world for different reasons. It's always madness when their wolf awakes, and it always awakens. Mostly, there's a lot of blood and violence. It normally ends, sadly." I shuddered to think of waking up with my wolf in the human world, but that wasn't what had happened here. But now I asked, "Now we have a fighting chance," Lyanna said. "A fighting chance for what?" I asked. I had a feeling that there was still a big chance that something bad was still very much going to happen. "Marcus wants us to train you, to teach you how to be more in sync with your wolf," Lyanna told me. "I'll go first, since Ben is going to be taking Marcus's messages to the other packs that you're wolf, not human." I frowned at her. The training part made sense. They didn't want me to lose control and then go on an insane rampage. I could get on board with that. I didn't particularly like the idea of going on a bloodlust rampage either. "Why is he doing that?" I asked. I wanted to know more about Marcus too. I wanted to know why he had just run out of the room last night. I wanted some kind of explanation for him just getting up and leaving me alone in the bed. But that wasn't something that I could exactly get from Lyanna. I would just have to wait until I could get some time alone with him again. I just had to be in complete control of myself to make sure that I didn't just lose myself to my desires again. "Marcus hopes that it will quell the fighting for a bit," Lyanna answered. "If the other packs know that Marcus has a wolf mate, a true Luna by his side, then the other packs will definitely stop fighting us." I wasn't so sure about that, because what would happen when the packs found out that even though his mate was a wolf, she was a wolf that had no idea to even summon out claws of her own? I guess that was the point of the exercise. He wanted to make sure that I was something that couldn't bring weakness to the pack in any way. It still didn't explain how he had to just up and run out of the room as soon as we were done, though. Could this really not have waited even one night? Just thinking about it bothered me. I really needed to have a conversation alone with him because all of his actions were wrong, and he soon would have also a Luna to fight with. I didn't voice these thoughts aloud, and a moment later, Lana drew my attention away from them. Anyway. So Lyanna said to me, again, this is really simple, like breathing. Just focus on that part of you. Like if you were going to draw, just be the wolf. It's so easy. That was the third time she said that. I don't think she understood what the word easy meant. And I really didn't think that she understood just how frustrating hearing her tell me how easy this was supposed to be was, because I really didn't want to face the possibility that even though I was a wolf, I just wasn't meant to be one. Chapter 18, Shifting. And my fears turned out to be well placed, even though I had half shifted last night with Marcus. Nothing we did seemed to make it come back out. Now. Okay, stop, Lyanna said, staring at my face with an incredulous expression that just looks terrible. I dropped the stance that I'd been holding, not even sure what I was trying to do myself. It had worked with emotion last night, but obviously that couldn't be the key every single time. I'd seen wolves just transform without having to go through some intense crisis for each transformation. But whatever the key was, I just wasn't getting it. We spent hours trying different techniques, but I was getting more and more frustrated as we didn't get very far. You could try talking to your wolf, Lyanna suggested hopefully. Maybe she can help you. I wasn't so sure. She hadn't come out last night because I'd been talking to her. She had spoken to me because I had unlocked it. But still, I was at my wit's end, and I was ready to try anything. I closed my eyes and tried to picture her. I tried to remember what she looked like and how it felt to hear her in my head. It wasn't that hard, given that she was almost entirely white. It was strange. There was no other speck of color on her. Or maybe I just hadn't noticed it. I shook my head. I was losing focus here. But try as I might, no matter how hard I thought about her, she wouldn't materialize. Hello, because I called out in my head as a last resort. I felt ridiculous, like I was just screaming into the void, but there was nothing else that I could think of trying. I'm here because the voice answered. And then, just like that, I could see her in front of me again, just like last night. Oh, you're here, because I stammered. I wasn't sure. I didn't know how to get to you. But she shook her head. No, because she told me you can get to me just fine. It's yourself you're struggling to find. I frowned. That made absolutely no sense. I was the human, and the human form was perfectly accessible. It was the wolf form that I was struggling to find. You think that I take over when you transform? 'Cause she asked, tilting her head to the side just so. No, 'cause she shook her head. It's still you, just more primal. I'm only a part of you. I can't control you. I could feel my face burning, and I just knew that I was red. I had been telling myself that last night had just been the wolf, not really me. Head had been in control. When you're starving, because the wolf said, again, properly starving, then there is nothing that can stop you from eating when food is in front of you. Is that different from taking control or just a different side of you? I could understand her analogy. I just didn't want to. I wanted there to be an easier way to this. I wanted to just sit back and let her take control, like I had let her take control last night with Marcus. That wasn't me, 'cause she huffed. I wanted my mate, true, but you wanted yours just the same. Cat. I tried not to listen to her words. I didn't want to have to deal with it. And if I could just pretend that it was all her, then it would be fine. But it didn't look like she was going to let me do that. No, 'cause she said smugly. Yeah, I won't, because you can't pin all this on me. 'Cause I gritted my teeth. I really didn't want to have to deal with this. None of this was fair. It was just so much for me to have to deal with, so on after the other. But that wasn't the real reason that I was running away from everything that had happened. I knew what it was, too, Marcus. And it wasn't even him. It was that he had run out. He had just left me there after he was done with me. He had walked out of the room, almost ran out of the house. He had just left me all alone and only came back the next morning. And then he hadn't even come back to me. Not really. He had come back to train the next Luna. I snarled. There, Lyanna cried, clasping her hands together. There it is. I turned to look at the mirror, but her words had shocked me enough that by the time I glanced up, it was just my normal face that I was looking at it. Oh, by the moon goddess, Lyanna cursed. You couldn't even hold it for a minute. I felt irritation flare up in me, but nothing like the anger that had led to me awakening my wolf form. I had to recognize, though, while I didn't know what caused it, I had the feeling that I was reaching for the beginnings of it. I thought that I was beginning to understand what my wolf meant. I'm going to have to go to Marcus, Lyanna said softly, looking a little dejected. He wanted you transforming by now already. Then he can come and show me himself. I snarled at her. Oh, sorry, I said, covering my hand with my mouth. Marcus expected far too much from me, and if he was going to be doing that, then he should be the one teaching me. I wasn't going to accept this kind of behavior from him any longer. Lyanna didn't answer me. She simply turned and left the room. I was sure that I had offended her, but in all honesty, I couldn't find it in myself to care. She should tell her brother that he was being impossible. Something told me that she should have told him a long time ago, already. But these wolves were unwilling to challenge their alpha, and it wasn't just in combat. It was in everything. I couldn't understand how this could be a healthy way to live. It made absolutely no sense to me. I swallowed hard and sat down on the armchair in the bedroom. I needed to transform. And it wasn't just for Marcus' sake, it was for my own as well. I needed to be stronger. If I was going to live in this world, I needed to be as strong as I possibly could be. If I had been human, that would have been one thing, but I wasn't. I was as much a wolf as they were apparently. And I didn't want to lose it. Before I could let my thoughts get away from me, Marcus came into the room. He took one look at me and then turned around again. Follow me, he said, and then he walked out of the room. A very big part of me felt like just ignoring him out of spite. But I couldn't do that. I knew that I needed him for a bit first. I knew that I had to submit to him now, because without him, I wouldn't be able to transform. So I followed him out.
I was a little surprised to learn that it was already dark outside. Lyanna and I had been training together for the entire day then.
You're going to transform, Marcus told me. But his words were more a demand, and I bit my tongue from responding. But I knew that there was just no way that it was going to happen. Definitely not with him treating me like this. I tried. We worked through the night, and I tried as hard as I possibly could to transform. But there was just no way for me to possibly do it. I didn't know what I was supposed to unlock, what part of me I was supposed to reach into. But it just wasn't happening. And Marcus was only making things worse. I knew that it wasn't just this. As I collapsed in bed a few hours before sunrise, I knew that my inability to transform wasn't just because of some block inside of me. It was also because of what had happened with Marcus, but I wasn't willing to go there yet. Not even in my mind. Soon, I didn't have to fight it off any longer, as sleep claimed me easily. The next day, Marcus came and trained me again, or he tried to at least. but it ended up going mostly the same as the day before. 3 days went by like that with Marcus trying to train me and nothing happened. There wasn't even a single claw, not one tooth, that lengthened. And my wolf within me was quiet. She was still there. I could feel her presence, but there was nothing that I could do to get her to come out. And it was on the 5th day of working on it with Marcus that we both reached the end of our rope. "Why is this so hard for you?" he demanded from me. We stood beneath the full moon in the woods, and I think that was what had broken him finally. He had expected that it would just happen because the moon was just there for the both of us. I think he thought that because he was my mate with me beneath a full moon, my wolf would just answer. But it didn't work that way, and I knew that my wolf was not going to come out for him. This man that had abandoned me right after he claimed me. "How dare you?" I screamed at him, surprising even myself. I hadn't even felt the anger begin to rise in me. Maybe if I had, I would have been able to stop it. Maybe I would have been able to control it a little bit better. "You treat me like I'm nothing." I told him, my words coming through gritted teeth. "You have your wolves watch me like I'm a prisoner. You decide where and when I can go. You use me like I'm your personal object, and you expect me to obey and do what you demand of me." I snarled at him then, and the half-shift came over me. My nails lengthened. I felt my teeth longer than before, and I didn't think I reached for him, slashing across his chest. "You don't deserve to see my wolf," I snarled. And then I noticed the blood on his chest, and I realized what I had done. It was healed and gone before I even slipped out of my shift, but his shirt was still torn, the blood still staining it. Evidence of my actions, of my strength, of what I could do. I had made the alpha bleed. Chapter 19, you can go. I didn't wait for Marcus to react. I turned away from him, and I turned to the moon goddess. This was not about me and him. This had to do with Marcus, yes, but it wasn't all about him. This was about me, really, and the gifts that I had been given from the moon goddess. I wouldn't tie this to just him, not the experience and not the ability. I had become perfectly content with living in this world as myself, with being a part of this pack, and none of it had been for him. I would not make this about him now. I reached my hands out in front of me. I felt the moonlight on my skin. I had no idea how that was possible, but I felt it as surely as I felt the wind. It was a light sensation, a warmth and coolness at once, and I felt it seep into me, through my skin, through every pore on my body. And I felt the moon goddess guide me in this. I felt her voice whisper to me on the winds. I felt her calmness and her energy. I felt every bit of it flowing through me. And I didn't fight it or try to guide it. I followed it. I followed the light that settled on my skin and then flowed through me. And the change came over as easily as it would have been to slip into a pool of water. I expected pain, but this was something excruciating. I'd never once thought that I would be able to bear a pain like this. It was like the water I had slipped into was trying to tear my skin from me. And it was soothing all at once, too. It was like the water coated me, soothed me, and formed new skin over me. I felt my heart stop and restart. I felt a rushing by my ears. I felt an intense scent hit me full on. After a moment, I realized it was Marcus. But I didn't focus on that. I didn't focus on him. I took a few deep and calming breaths. One moment, I was the human. And the next, I was a wolf. I shook myself, feeling my fur move like a flowing river over me. The cold was gone. I was suddenly very hot beneath the night sky. I needed to run. And so I did. I didn't think of who was watching me, who would give chase. I thought of something, and I did it. It was the easiest thing in the world to give in to temptation. No, not temptation, instinct. The wolf knew what had to be done. The wolf knew what to do. And so I did. I was the wolf, and there were centuries of knowledge and information stored within me, instincts passed down from generation to generation. There was absolutely no way for me to deny it. After a moment, I sensed someone following me, and I turned around and snarled. It was Marcus' mate, 'cause my mind told me, but he was in human form. He hadn't transformed. He probably hadn't wanted to provoke me. That was wise. I might just turn on him now. I remembered the place I had wounded him just a few minutes ago. I hoped that it would scar. I wanted him to have a permanent reminder not to mess with me. But I knew that it wouldn't. Maybe if I hurt him in this form, it would scar and mark. But that wasn't the last time we went running under the moon. The full moon lasted for 3 nights. 3 nights where the moon, to the naked eye, looked as full, and I transformed every night beneath it, snarling at Marcus if he so much as tried to come near me. And the 3rd night after my transformation, I had forgiven him enough to allow him to transform alongside me and join me on a run. We ran through the forest near our home. It was impossible to run through the entire territory in one night. I didn't stay in wolf form for very long. And by the evening, I shifted back to human form, only after going into the bedroom of our house. Marcus humored me by transforming outside and then opening the doors for me. You know, he told me once I was in human form again, you're going to have to get used to just shifting outside. It's not that big a deal. I reached for a dress and pulled it over myself quickly. You get to decide for yourself. I told him, wrapping my arms around me, and I will decide for myself. Thank you very much. Marcus chuckled softly, and I offered a small smile. I wasn't done being angry with him. Leanna spoke to me earlier. I'm not sure if she did it because he sent her or because she could see. I was still not letting Marcus near me. She explained that Marcus woke her up that night with the line, she can't fully transform, but she is one of us. We need to help her. She must be in pain, and our enemies can hurt her. If they hurt her, they hurt all of us. I could understand the predicament that he found himself in, and I knew that I had to be a little more understanding about everything than I was being. He had a difficult position, but I also needed him to understand that so did I. Marcus, I said softly, letting my smile drop. There's something that I really have to discuss with you. He nodded and moved to sit down on the bed. I followed him there and sat next to him. I need to leave, I told him softly, but hear me out. I promise you, I don't want to leave, and I will come back, but I need to know more about who I am, and to discover that I have to go back to the people that raised me. Marcus didn't object immediately, but I suppose that I had said enough of the right words to make him pause and think. Doesn't it concern you? I asked him, sitting down next to him. Don't you wonder where I came from? I was silent for a moment, allowing my words to settle in his mind. It wasn't easy to have to do this to him, and it wouldn't be easy for me either. But the truth was that we had to know who I was and where I came from. It just wasn't safe for the pack for me to just keep living like this. Marcus didn't answer for a long time, and I knew that he was warring between 2 parts of himself. It was his duty as alpha to protect the pack, and right now, that meant finding out more about my past. and it was his responsibility and need as my mate to protect me and keep me close at all times. But one choice would have more lasting consequences than the other. And if we didn't find out where I came from, then chances were that it would only get harder the longer we waited. Do you still want to be away from me? Marcus asked softly, turning to look at me. I knew why he was asking. I was a wolf now, but everything about being a werewolf hadn't settled into me entirely. It was like there were parts of it that I had to learn from scratch, and maybe he was more than a little concerned that the mate bond was one of those things that hadn't just come naturally, too. Open I answered honestly, because I wasn't sure what I felt for him. I wasn't sure what the mate bond had created, if it had created anything. But I knew that I wasn't trying to run away from him any longer. I don't want to be away from you, I clarified, or the pack. I'm not trying to run away from who and what I am anymore. And I don't think that is possible any longer. Not now, but if I don't go back, it will be the same as if I were just trying to run away from who I am. I'm not from your pack, but I have to be from somewhere. I hadn't wanted to bring this next point up, but I don't think that I will make any headway with him. If I don't, I know the wolves with Jason were just trying to stir up trouble, I told him. But there is a possibility of truth now. They had been quiet these past couple of days, especially Jason. I'd seen him around, but he hadn't even been able to look me in the eye. They had no more grounds for getting rid of me. I wasn't human. All their arguments were in vain. But there was still the possibility of danger to their words, even if they didn't see it themselves. What do you mean? Marcus asked me. I took a deep breath before answering. I didn't want to say what I was thinking, but I knew that even if he had just agreed to send me back to my old family, I would still have to tell him my idea. I think I told him softly that there is now a chance that everything they were saying is right. Radio stared at me in confusion. They were saying that and I hadn't. I knew exactly what they had said. Obviously, I'm not a spy. I told him I had no idea that I was even a wolf, but maybe it was something similar to that. I suggested, a little hesitant. Something like a sleeper agent, or something like that. Do wolves even have things like that? I had no idea what I was talking about, but I had a nagging feeling that I hadn't just been lost. I couldn't imagine that my human parents had stolen me, and how was that even possible for humans to steal anything from werewolves, much less a baby? But then, how could I just be lost? How could werewolves misplace a baby, knowing that one day it was going to grow up to be a werewolf? None of this made any kind of sense. I don't know. Marcus murmured eventually, his eyes holding my gaze. I know that there is nothing that some of our clans won't do to try and gain power again. For a moment, he just looked at me, and I felt the entire weight of his scrutiny on me. I was sure that he would decide against me, not for any reason other than the fact that he had told me so many times that he wasn't going to let me go. I knew that he was still afraid that I would just run away, and I couldn't blame him. But I wasn't that same person any longer. The little girl that had come to the pack as a scared human just didn't exist. I was a wolf now. First, I need to apologize, he suddenly said, and this surprised me. Apologize? I asked hesitantly. The first night we were together, I didn't do it on purpose, but after we both came, I realized I had to do something to help you, because you were unable to shift, and I felt you in pain. So, his voice was firm, but I heard also some sadness in it. I let the alpha in me act and should have been more thoughtful of you, and I wanted to smile. I really did. but I knew it would probably go against me if he felt I would rejoice at this small win for me. So I nodded once, acknowledging his word. All right, he sighed, you can go. Chapter 20, leaving it area. Leaving the Packlands was harder than I thought it would be. Marcus accompanied me right to the edge, and even when we reached there, he seemed to linger. This was hard for him too, but I had been prepared for that. I hadn't been prepared for how hard it would be for me. I felt a pull to the lands that I was walking away from. I felt a pull to the wolves that I was leaving. Marcus explained to me that I wouldn't go mental like the Luna he told me about because he hadn't sealed our bond yet. He hadn't marked me, nor did I mark him. This gave me some peace of mind. A part of me felt like even the moon would be different once I left here. The moon goddess was strange. I could feel her influence over me. I could feel the need to transform greater under the full moon, but it was just a gentle whispering. A suggestion that was near a temptation, but it was nothing overpowering, like in all the stories. Something told me that whispering would be gone once I left the Packland. Stay with your guards always, Marcus told me firmly. There will be other wolves around you in the human city, and they will be able to tell who and what you are. I knew all of this. He had told me all of this before, back when I had still been trying to escape by any means necessary. This was so strange. Now this leaving the Packlands had been everything that I had ever wanted. And now I was finally getting it. And I only wished that I didn't have to leave. A part of me wished that I had never given this suggestion. A part of me wished that I had just been content with not knowing who I was. But I knew that was an impossibility sooner or later. That information would be crucial. And sooner or later, it might just lead to another war or something close to it. No, I had to go. But we don't have to be happy about it. 'Cause the wolf answered me. 'Cause I agreed with her. Yeah, we don't. She wasn't happy about having to leave her mate behind. Ever since I had transformed, she had gotten the chance to be with Marcus properly. To be with his wolf form, and I could only imagine the war that Marcus was having within himself, trying to restrain his wolf. We will not be gone long, as I assured my own wolf. And when we return, I will let you see your mate first. I had no idea what to say to Marcus as I was leaving. I could only imagine how difficult it would be to speak to him. Once I return, please be safe, Marcus told me. They will protect you with their lives, but it might not be enough. You need to protect yourself. I nodded. I will try, I told him. I couldn't guarantee anything, but I could promise that I would at least try to be safe. I would at the very least try to come home to him safely. She is your Luna, he said, turning to the 5 wolves that would take me back from where I had come. Her life is your responsibility. The wolves bowed to him, and then we all turned and headed away from the forest. I didn't look back once. It was a short walk to the place where they had parked the cars, and once we were all seated, it was a simple drive back into the city. It wasn't even long, and in about 2 hours, I knew where we were again. Even as I knew where we were, I couldn't quite feel the same about it. I knew the roads and the signs, but I didn't recognize anything. More than that, there was something else that was bothering me. I had a nagging sensation that something was wrong. I felt like someone was watching me, the same kind of creeping feeling. But I couldn't sense anyone, and I was sure that if there really was someone watching me, my wolf senses would have told me that I was in danger. But ever since we left the Packlands, that was what I had felt. My parents live on an estate. I told the wolves that were with me, we're not going to be able to just drive through. We'll have to use the pedestrian gates. None of them were happy about it, but I gave directions to Emil, who was driving, and we parked the car. As soon as we got out, I felt the hair on my back stand up. There was no way that no one was watching us. "Can you smell that?" Adrian, another of the wolves, asked me. I sniffed the air lightly, and immediately I picked up on what he was saying. "That's a wolf," I murmured. There was no way that it couldn't be. It was the smell of the forest, dark and husky. "It's a wolf from red timber," Emil answered grimly. "Smells like more than one. They're not going to be happy that we're here." When my thoughts swirled in my mind like crazy, do both of your parents have to be wolves for a person to be born a wolf shifter? I asked, a new idea sparking in my mind. Or can just one be? "No," Leon answered. "One parent with the wolf blood is enough." "So my mother," I began as we walked through the streets toward my home, "she might be a human and my dad might be a wolf." "What makes you think she isn't the wolf herself?" Adrian asked me again. "Let's not rule anything out until we find her." I was silent for the rest of the trip. There were so many possibilities to all of this, so many options that I hadn't considered. And I had no idea what I was going to find here. I just knew that everything was going to be different. And we reached the house that I had grown up in. As prominent as the smell of wolf was in the town, there was nothing here at this door. Not even my scent lingered any longer, and there were only humans inside. There was no way that my wolf heritage came from my mother. But I knocked anyway. She still held the keys to answer some of where I had been. We didn't wait long, and then she opened the door for a moment. And then she shook her head and stared at me, almost like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Ariella?" she asked, and even her voice sounded different. My mother had not been a kind woman. She had been domineering and controlling at best. She had been cruel at worst, and she had always held it over me that she was the mother, and there was nothing that I could do about it. All of that was missing from her tone. Now, she sounded softer, almost afraid even. And for a moment, I wondered what that was. And then as I looked further into the house and I glimpsed myself in the mirror, I realized that it was me. It wasn't that I just didn't feel like the same person that had left this town. It was that I didn't look like her either. I was completely different, and if I hadn't known about wolf shifters and seen myself now, I wouldn't have guessed that was what I was. But now that I knew, there was no doubt in my mind. I looked like the 5 wolves that accompanied me here. I looked more like them than I did my own mother. And I knew at once that she wasn't my mother. She didn't smell like Ken. She didn't look like me. And I could hear her heart beating human, but more than just human. There was nothing in it that was familiar. "Yes," I told her simply, "I'm Ariella, but that's not what I came here for. I want to know who you are." She looked at me strangely then, and then she nodded, opening the door wider. "You can come in," she told me softly, "and then I will answer whatever you have to ask." I stepped over the threshold without fear. I wasn't as easily afraid any longer. I remember when I had run away from here, fleeing from my step-father's wrath. There was no fear left in me for him. He was nothing to be afraid of in any case. But more than that, there was nothing that I had to fear from the humans at all. I made my way into the living room. It was both recognizable and foreign. Everything here seemed so strange. I sat down on the couch, and the others spread out around us. "I am Lucille," the woman spoke softly, her eyes downcast, "and I told you to call me mother. But that is not who I am." David walked in and stood in shock watching me. Perhaps my look scared him. because he didn't say a word. He probably knew I was not that fragile and scared girl anymore. He stared at me for a few seconds, then went to stand with Lucille. It was almost impossible to think that I had once considered this woman my mother. Because now that she said those words, it was like she had simply told me the sky was blue. How did I get to you? We found you in the Beltane forest near the waterfall where the lake meets the mountain, she answered. David and I told you that he was your stepfather because you looked nothing like either of us. It made more sense to pretend that your father was someone else. I stared at her impassively. She had lied to me my whole life, but even she didn't know the truth. She hadn't kept anything from me that was truly important. You were so little, she continued, and you were wrapped so tightly up in a blanket. It was the simplest thing to just pick you up and take you with us. I need the blanket, I told her simply. She had raised me, not well, but she had raised me. And yet I felt nothing for her. A moment later, David came into the room carrying the small blanket. Mel took it from him, stopping him before he could come any closer to me. You're Lucille said, again, looking at me. You're different. You look like her, but you're not her. I stood up without saying anything to her. She hadn't loved me, and I hadn't loved her. She had taken me hoping to complete a fairy tale, but she hadn't been a mother. I'm not her, I answered her truthfully. She's gone. I did try to love her, Lucille answered sadly. It just wasn't my nature. I know, I assured her. I knew when I was her too. Thank you for keeping this blanket. I am truly grateful. And then, without saying anything else, I turned and left, my wolves right behind me, and I headed home. This part has ended. Thank you for listening. If you would like to continue listening to the next part, please let me know by leaving a comment.